Okay, let's start off. We'll record this, and this is 2:24, we said. 25. Okay. All right. So, people have been asking this question for a really long time. Where did the first living things come from? Where do living things come from, period? Their mama! Which seems like a really obvious answer to you. It hasn't always been. Do you realize that there was a point in human history where the, let's say, contributing role of the male was not understood in terms of pregnancy? How'd you get pregnant? I don't know, just woke up this way one day. Really, there was a point in human history when it was not understood that sexual activity led to reproduction. So women were really viewed as magical because within themselves, they carried the ability to create a human with no intervention from anybody else. That's magic. That's cool. We know differently now. If you don't know how people get pregnant, I would suggest that you sign up for Mrs. Sylvie's class again. She does a very good job of detailing both how it does happen and how to prevent it happening at points in one's life when one might not want it to happen. Okay.
Walmart bag.
Huh?
Anyone hear about that?
No. Don't want to either. Okay, so I'll let you copy this. And you just defined this word a little while ago. And the fact that it was not always well known that things came from their mama and their papa, or at least not how that happened. So one of the early ideas that humans believed, lots of humans believed, if you traveled back to the Middle Ages and you were a peasant in a village someplace in Europe, slogging through the mud every day, doing your peasant thing, where do maggots come from? Oh, maggot, that's easy. Maggots come from rotting meat. If you leave rotting meat out, it will grow maggots spontaneously. There is no known cause. They just appear on the meat. If you leave little bundles of rags and stuff in an old house, it will grow mice. It will grow baby mice. They will just appear. They'll just show up. They'll just appear, right? Anybody got a problem with this? Yeah, I hope so. Where do baby mice come from? Their mamas and their daddies. Maggots are baby flies. Where do baby flies come from?
Baby maggots.
Their mamas. Maggots come from their mamas and their papas. Everything comes from a parent. Okay, but you have to put yourself into the shoes of somebody living in the 14th century. They didn't know that. So these things really genuinely did come out of nowhere. Where do frogs come from? Mud. In the spring, as mud puddles dry up, little tiny frogs appear as if by magic. So they must come from mud, right? Makes perfect sense. There were people who didn't believe this to be the case. Now, obviously, like cows, horses, you could tell that a baby cow came from a mama cow. How could you tell? Because you saw it come out in all its bloody, slithery, gory mess. I know, it's after lunch, not before. But, we knew that baby humans came from their mothers. Now, we didn't know about the father's part. But, it was really obvious that baby humans came out of adult female humans. Baby cows came out of adult female cows. So we knew that. But there were things that you didn't see. Where do fish come from? Where do baby fish come from? Sandy, gravelly sides of the creek. Yeah. Because it's not as though fish give live birth. You don't see a mama fish spitting out baby fish. Okay? So these were things that weren't really well understood. The idea is spontaneous generation. Generation. Look at that root there. G-E-N. Have you seen that elsewhere?
Yeah.
Okay. So how could you, if you suspected that this was a bunch of hooey, how could you prove it scientifically? How could you prove that this was ridiculous scientifically? Okay, I'm going to read the slide. You can copy, and then we'll talk about it. So, Reedy, Spanzelli, and Pasteur all used the scientific method to disprove spontaneous generation. In Reedy's experiment, he put meat in a sealed jar, and when he covered it to keep out the adult flies, no maggots grew on the meat. Spanzelli and Pasteur did two different versions of an experiment using broth. So in both cases, they sterilized the broth and then sealed it. And once it was sterilized and then sealed, you didn't have any growth of microorganisms. So I'll let you copy that. Same kind of jar, same kind of meat, same kind of everything. Now, when Reedy did it the first time, over the other jar, one jar was left totally open. So we know that it's not the jar that's preventing the maggots from growing on the meat. So everything else is identical. This one has, gauze over it, like cheesecloth. This is a very fine cloth. Air can get in and out. This thing will breathe, but little flies can't get in. This one's totally open to the air. This experiment was later repeated, and a solid cover was put on this. So no air could get in or out, no nothing. Nothing at all could get in or out. Now, what's interesting is, what do you think happened to this one? Maggots. Yeah. Waiting a couple weeks and there were maggots all over it. So this one had a full complement, and we'll make our maggots yellow so they show up nicely. Of little maggots.
So you think it's the ear?
Hold on. So this one's open to everything. This second one thing that was observed. Now, how many of you have seen roadkill? The flies start buzzing around it pretty quickly. Well, there were flies buzzing around this first jar. There were flies landing on the meat. Well, on the second jar that was open to the air, so that what would be delicious to a fly, that delicious smell of rotting meat, was wafting out of the jar, and it was observed that there were little flies landing on the cloth on the top of the jar. They couldn't get down to the meat, but they would land on the cloth top. And sure enough, guess what they got on that cloth top? Maggots. So flies landed on that cloth top. They left maggots there. Now this one, with the solid lid, no smell of rotting meat coming out of it, nothing to attract flies, no flies anywhere near it. Also, guess what? No maggots. So, based on this, what Reedy says is, hey, maggots don't come from meat, maggots come from flies. And then sure enough, you can take some maggots and raise them and watch them turn into adult. Okay, so this was Reedy's experiment. The other two that were done were both with broth. So if you take a jar, and we'll make this a nice, we'll make it chicken broth. So nice, could be chicken broth, could be a urine sample. It's chicken broth. If we take a nice jar of chicken broth and leave it open for a few days on the counter, it's going to spoil. You all have refrigerators in your house, I would guess. And keeping food cold prevents it from spoiling. We close things up, we put them away. Well, if you leave this jar of chicken broth out for a few days, it turns a real... We'll pick this up tomorrow, but broth left out for a few days gets cloudy and smells bad. It spoils.